I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. The wingman today on the Sober Friends Podcast is Tim Phillips. Tim Phillips is the host of the Sober and Happy podcast. We try to be open-minded with a growth mindset here. Tim has a lot of similarities to my story, and he forks off at a certain place. Tim, welcome to the Sober Friends Podcast.
Hey, thank you, Matt, for having me on. I look forward to catching up with you.
Absolutely. I was looking forward to this. I was doing a lot of binging today on your podcast when I have somebody on, one of my character defects is I overprocess and overthink and feel like I have to be overprepared and think of everything. And sometimes that takes me away from just having a conversation with somebody. But I listen to a lot because your podcast is incredibly, I think you said it before we came on, it's bite-sized. For the most part, with my ADD mind, I can get through 12 to 15 minutes of this. I've got something and I'm on my way. I like practical, and you bring practical. So I'm excited to talk to you. What brings you here? So if you're doing a sobriety podcast, you must have had a problem with alcohol. Let's go to the beginning. What gets you to such a nice place where we're talking about overcoming the addiction to alcohol?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't the plan I had when I set off my life goals and I set off to drinking. You know,
I've said that recently that, you know what, when I got out of college, what I was taking my degree for is when I get out of college, I need to get into an AA group. I really want to join AA because that's what I'm working towards. Now, it turns out in college, I kind of was working towards that parallel to my studies with my drinking. But yeah, we don't ever plan on being here. We end up here.
No, exactly. And you know, it's funny you talked about when you got out of college. So I didn't do a whole lot of drinking in high school. I was raised by an amazing mom who was also very religious. So drinking was against the rules, and I hated disappointing my mom. So I didn't do a lot of drinking. The few times I did, I knew I was going to drink again. Like from the first time. Like I knew it was going to happen again. And I just kept thinking, man, when I get to college, man, this is going to be fun. And so I went to college. I had a blast, but you know, I realized early on that I drank differently than a lot of the other guys I went to college with, that they partied just as hard as me, but there just seemed to be something a little different. But I still figured, you know, once college is over, time to get serious about life. I'll settle down, I'll find a wife, I'll have some children, I'll have a good career, and like, I'll just drink like a normal person, you know, come home, maybe have a scotch, you know, help the kids with homework, and that was going to be it. And that wasn't my story. You know, I mean, I wouldn't be doing a podcast about recovery if...
Did you really have your mind on scotch at like 21, 22, getting out of college?
You know, the reason why I say scotch specifically is the guy I moved... So I grew up in a small town in Northern California, and me and one of my friends moved to Phoenix to go to school together. We were roommates. We threw the same crazy parties. We did all of that together. And my plan of settling down and drinking responsibly is exactly what he did. And he's a scotch drinker. So when I imagine how it should have been, I look at him as that example, because that's exactly what he did. He comes home from work. He has a scotch or two. He's an amazing father. He goes to every one of his daughter's dance recitals. Drinking just is something he does. It doesn't control his life. It's not his top priority, you know, and he's able to do it responsibly. And that was my plan.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah.
I had parents who had alcohol problems, and just hearing about your friend from college, I can't relate to him at all. Of just, I'm going to do this normally and do other stuff, and this is just a little something I do to relax. Like drinking a cup of coffee outside and moving on. I still can't get my head around that.
I didn't understand it either. And like I said, he partied just as hard as I did, so, but it never was a problem with him. He was always responsible, and he still to this day.
You talked about in a recent episode about the testing with rats and putting them together of like simulating a social environment. And it almost seems like for a lot of people, college is like that. Because I just went to a reunion. I guess it's 25 years, my 25-year reunion. And I went with people who drank quite a bit. We went out, they didn't drink at all.
Yeah.
And they were like, eh.
And that's what, and it's funny because that blows me away that, like, there are people who don't drink in this world simply because they don't want to. Like,
my wife was like that.
I remember when I first got sober and I met a coworker and we were at a social event, like Christmas party or something. And I was so worried about how am I going to tell people I don't drink, and what if someone offers me a drink? And like, I heard her say, no, thank you. And someone's like, oh, you don't drink? And she's like, no. And I'm like, oh, thank God, another recovering alcoholic. Like I automatically assumed like if you don't drink, it's because you like can't. And so like I walked up to her and I'm like, oh, thank God someone else doesn't drink, And then as I was talking to her, I realized like she's like, yeah, I drank a couple of times. I didn't like how it made me feel, so I just don't drink. And to me, that sounds so weird to me.
It's so bizarre. Like now that you've told me that, I feel like I have less in common with you because you don't drink.
Yeah, exactly. Or people who drink normally. Like I don't know how many times I heard someone say like, man, if I could drink normally, I would drink all the time. It's like, well, and initially that actually makes sense, but, that's how we think. And I think that that's what got us to where we were.
If you have that mindset of, I wish I could just drink normally, or if I could do this, then I would be able to drink normally and moderately. If you're in that mindset, it's already broke. You can't recover it because the people like my wife who drinks normally, which means very infrequently, she never thinks about it that way. She only thinks about, well, I could have a drink, but I'm very worried I'm going to be too tired. Or I'm going to get a headache. So maybe I will, but then she'll have like half a glass and put it aside. I'm like, yeah, I'm done, which to me has always felt like alcohol abuse.
Yeah, I could never get that. And the other thing is like you'd hear a lot of people say, I wish there was a pill that would help me drink normally. I'm like, so we're hoping that there's a drug we could take so that we can continue to drink.
It's just easier at that point not to drink because that's what normal people do. They just basically don't drink. It's not a thought in their mind. And so for me, it's just a hell of a lot easier not to do so.
Yeah, but the difference is like drinking's our solution to whatever, and it's so many people, it's our solution to whatever. A normal drinker, it's not their solution. So like when we take it away, like we lose our solution. Everyone else sees it as, from the outside, it looks like a problem, but it's our solution. So when we remove it, we removed our solution. And if we don't find other ways to treat whatever we were trying to mask down with our drinking, like, of course we're going to drink again because we have no other solutions.
If you're new and you're considering maybe having a problem, really double back and hit that 15-second thing a couple of times and listen to what Tim said again. Drinking is the solution to our problems. That's not the case with other people. That's where I realized I had a problem and everything had to change. Getting sober to me is about replacing the solution with something healthier so that alcohol isn't that thing. That is some wise advice, Tim. So tell me more. Tell me more about what the wreckage looked like for you.
So it's, at first it was about even consequences and what it was giving me. I would say the wreckage happened quickly when on my 20th birthday, I was still going to college. A series of very bad decisions when I was drunk I ended up waking up in jail when I was on my 20th birthday. We were
There you
partying the
go.
night before. There was some issue with some guys at the party. Someone said, hey, let's go over to their house and handle them. And, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I thought that was a good idea. Three of us showed up on these guys' doorstep. We knocked on the door. They didn't answer. One of the guys opened the door. It was unlocked. And then the third guy said, oh, you know what? Let's show them. Let's just take a bunch of their crap. And we did. No intention of stealing it to sell it. It was just like, in our drunken state of mind, that sounded like good revenge rather than waking them up and beating them up. And so we left there. They lived in an apartment complex. It obviously looked suspicious. Three guys leaving an apartment at 3 a.m. with a mountain bike and golf clubs and all that. And so they called the cops and we got arrested. So I wake up on my 20th birthday in jail, charged with 3 felonies. And we were out in the desert for my birthday party earlier in the night. And the guy who we were with, he brought his gun out to the desert.
Oh, boy.
Because drinking and shooting guns is a good combination when you're in the desert. And because we had it, they were actually looking at charging us with home invasion robbery, even though we didn't use the gun in the commission of the crime. So right there, I knew like alcohol was bad for me. And like at 20 years old, I was like, that's it. It's bad for me. I'm not going to drink again. And that lasted for 30 days. And all of that stuff like we just talked about where it took my solution away, like all the fears, like, and these are legitimate fears. I was looking at some serious prison time, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to be just like my dad. My dad was sitting in state prison in Arizona. So like all those things where they're like, you're going to end up just like your dad if you drink and use drugs. Like I literally was going to end up in the same prison system as my dad. And so that scared me sober, but I didn't have a solution to replace. I didn't know how to handle fear. I didn't know how to handle anxiety. I didn't know how to handle emotions. I didn't know any of that. So I was flooded with those emotions. I did not have any healthy coping mechanisms of it. So like it was getting so bad that at the end of 30 days of being sober, like I just couldn't take it anymore. So I just drank, and that was the longest period of sobriety. Luckily I didn't go to prison. We ended up making a plea bargain. I did end up a felon for a while because of that, but I got probation. And then honestly, as bad as that was, it all went downhill after that.
Oh my God. Because right now I'm looking at you as pretty lucky just to get off with probation on something like that. You are fortunate.
Yeah, it was. And it wasn't like I got hired a good attorney. I was a public defender that was able to get it. It did help the fact that I was about to graduate college. I had no priors. There was some beneficial things. Got probation, and then the weird thing is there was a part of my brain that when I got the probation, I told myself, like, see, there wasn't any real consequences, and so it kind of was like, yeah, it wasn't that bad. And that's the way we could kind of start justifying it, and then, like I said, it only got worse from there. Now, I'm not talking legal matters, I didn't get convicted of any felonies after that, but my ability to just function and how I felt inside, it just kept getting worse and worse, and I went through the standard things. I had trouble holding down a job, truck repoed, evicted from apartments, blew up every relationship I had. I had a lot of those, and it just finally got to the point in my last 3 years were absolutely pathetic. The only job I could hold down was a morning bartending gig. I had a lot of things that I didn't know how to deal with when I started drinking, and then you pile on all the guilt and shame of the wreckage that I caused of 18 years of drinking, and like I didn't know how to deal with it. And those last 3 years, I drank every waking moment of my existence, for 3 years straight. I woke up, I grabbed a bottle before I even got out of bed. I took a swig before I even went to the bathroom in the morning, and then I'd drink and I'd pass out, wake up, drink and pass out, wake up, drink and pass out. And I held a morning bartending gig. I would drink as much as I possibly could on my shift, and hopefully would make enough in tips to get a bottle for the way home, 2 packs of cigarettes, and gas money to the bar to get back to the bar the next day. And like all my hopes and dreams that I had when I was younger, everything I thought I was going to do, like that's what it all boiled down to. That's what my life goals were, and it was an absolute pathetic existence, but I honestly didn't know a way out.
It was only existing. Hearing that is not living life.
No.
That's existing from moment to moment and not sustainable.
And living in the moment's good, but not that. Yeah,
that's not living in the moment. That's
just existing for trying. It was just surviving. The only way I knew how to survive.
So it sounds like you got tired of just surviving. What was it that made you say, I got to stop here and I'm going to stop, and something was different about it?
So the exact moment, I couldn't tell you. This is, people ask me what my rock bottom was, and I'm like, I was a blackout drunk. I sent my mom a text during a blackout. So I don't remember exactly what encouraged me to send that text at that moment. I already conceded to the fact that I was going to kill myself. Like, I already planned out my suicide. I knew how I was going to do it. I knew where I was going to do it. And I thought I was going to be doing the whole world a favor. A lot of people say suicide is selfish, but I saw all the pain I was causing everybody else, and I honestly thought that a temporary pain of losing me was better than prolonged pain of continuing to put the people I love through watching me slowly drink myself to death. So, but I don't remember why I sent my mom that text. Now I'll tell you the moment that I conceded that that I wanted to actually get better. So I sent my mom a text. I woke up from being passed out. My roommate was knocking on my door and said, "Hey, your mom's at the door. She says she's here to take you out to dinner." Now, forgetting I made dinner plans with my mom was normal. So I just put on my shoes and I would go with it. So we're sitting at the dinner table. We're at a Mexican restaurant in Sacramento, and she grabs and she starts talking to me about rehab. And I'll tell you, I got really pissed off that she was talking to me about rehab. I hated people talking to me about my drinking. So what I decided to do, so I went to the bathroom to collect my thoughts. And when people would talk to me about drinking, I like to make the conversation so uncomfortable that they would never want to have that conversation with me again. So if I could point out all your flaws, if I could point out how you're not a good parent, I don't care. I was cold. And so I was sitting in the bathroom trying to compose myself. And I'm like, well, here's all the shit that happened to me when I was a kid, So I was ready to put a lot of the blame of my drinking onto my mom. And my mom was an amazing mother. But I was ready to do this. And right when I'm about to walk out of the bathroom, I got a text message from a friend. And I look at my phone, and then I see the text message chain from my mom. And I open it up, and I saw a text message where I told her, "If you find me a rehab, I will go." So I realized right then, I had this vision of my mom sitting at that table in that restaurant and thinking that all of her prayers had been answered. And I realized I was just moments away of going out and absolutely breaking her heart again. And this time doing it in a restaurant full of people. So at that moment, I actually got the first really good look at the person I'd become. And I didn't think I was going to be able to stay sober. I didn't know anybody who drank like I did that stopped drinking. So I didn't know if it was going to be possible, but I knew at that moment that my mom deserved for me to at least try. And so I went out, I sat at that table, and I said, "Hey, you find me a place, I'll go." And she got on it. Like 3 days later, she's like, I got you airline tickets. You're going to Battle Creek, Michigan. I found you a rehab there, and I just decided to go.
I listened to episode 31, The Effects of Addiction Has on Our Families. And I'm listening to this. Your mom sounds like the sweetest woman on the planet and the most patient woman on the planet, and putting her through that.
Yeah, and like everybody, what you said, like that's exactly how everybody describes my mom. Your mom is the sweetest lady in the world. And it's funny because like my mom used to have her own addiction problems. My mom had a problem with both alcohol and meth, and she ran with my dad. My dad was a big old burly biker guy, that spent 25 years on and off in prison, and everything that goes with that. So it's weird imagining that my mom used to be a different version of who she is now. Because I never saw that. I was grateful that she got sober when I was probably about 3. So like I don't have any memories of her using, and all I got was the amazing version of the person she is now.
Well, she learned some lessons, obviously. When she quit drinking, there are some things that she learned that kept her sober that she could pass on to you, or at least had the tools to be patient. But I can't even, as a parent now, thinking, oh my God, you as my kid would be my worst nightmare. This is what I fear all the time, is that my kids will end up in addiction. And then I have to think about, I got to let that go because I have no control over that, but it terrifies me.
And that's what she had to learn. And she talks about in that episode. She went to Al-Anon because she was really struggling. And that's the one thing is that she had to love me, but she had to let me go. And she really conceded to the truth that she probably was gonna see me die, that I was probably gonna die before her, and I can't imagine a parent like accepting that as a reality, but she had to, because that probably is what was gonna happen. I mean, I thought that's what was gonna happen too.
It's more likely than not. Most people in your situation don't recover. They don't find sobriety. They end up dying. You're really the exception to the rule.
And most of the people at the bar I hung out with, a lot of them I'm still Facebook friends with. And I can't even count how many of those people are now dead.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's complications that you have from drinking, heart problems. And these aren't people in their 60s and 70s. These are people in their 40s and 50s that are dying, and it's just a reminder of just what it's like.
Yeah, it will kill you. It could be suicide, it could be health, it could be in your 40s, it could be in your 70s. But if you leave this untreated, more likely than not, it's gonna kill you. And that's still not enough for a lot of people, which is sad. We're the lucky ones.
Yeah.
So you did your rehab. What was that like? I haven't gone to a rehab.
It was exactly what I needed, to be honest. It was they medically detoxed me. The amount that I was, my blood alcohol level was in the 4s when I went in there, and that's after flying across country.
Holy cow.
Yeah, that's after flying across country, and so like I definitely needed to be medically detoxed. I know I've had seizures before, and so after that, and honestly, it wasn't. I was scared of the detox, but they drugged me up so much, and then weaned me off of that the detox wasn't that bad. I enjoyed rehab. I enjoyed learning a lot. That we had classes all day, every day. It was like 8 hours a day. We were taking different classes, and it was a lot. We didn't get to leave. It was pretty much a lockdown rehab facility, and it was good. I liked what I learned, but I sure was scared to leave. And it was at your pace. They had a program, and you worked that program, and it was an at your pace thing, and I dragged my feet as slow as humanly possible, trying not to get noticed, because I was scared to leave, because I wanted to stay sober, but I didn't think it was possible to stay sober outside of rehab. And so what happened is they noticed I was helping people with homework, multiple steps, because I loved helping people. And these people I was helping people getting ready to graduate with homework that were like 3 weeks ahead of me. And they're like, well, wait a minute, let me see your actual book. And then they saw that I've actually already did all the work. I just wasn't presenting it out. And they're like, it's time for you to go, Tim. So, so I enjoyed it. But like I said, if they would have offered me a janitor job there and free room and board, I probably would have stayed. That's how scared I was.
Safe there.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to drink in rehab.
Nope.
So what did that look like? So now you're out in the open and you're back out to the real world. What did that look like, and what was your plan for continuing to be sober?
So I didn't. I mean, they gave us a relapse prevention plan, and I had my 1 and my 5 and my 10-year goals. When I got out, I didn't know how to deal with life. I had a lot of things I needed to take care of. I hadn't filed taxes in probably 12 years.
Oh my God.
License suspended in 2 states, the failure to appear in Arizona. Like, I had a lot of problems I needed to fix. Plus, and that doesn't even include like trying to make things right with all my friends and family members. That was just the law, and like how to become a functional person of society again. So I got out, and that's initially what I was focused on, because I'm like, if I'm focused solely on like fixing things, calling DMV, being on hold with DMV, and I was living in my mom's house too. So one thing I knew, my mom paid for my rehab. She dropped 24 grand to send me to rehab. She didn't have an extra 24 grand. She had to take that out of her 401k, And so one thing I did know is I wasn't going to drink in my mom's house, or while I was living with her. So I knew that was set in my mind. I knew it wasn't going to happen. So I was safe at that time. And then I was distracted with trying to find a job. So eventually, a girl I used to drink with, her name was Tammy. She had been sober for a while, so she invited me to go to AA. And so I started going to meetings with her. And then that was the next 5 to 6 years of my life was really heavily dedicated to Alcoholics Anonymous.
So at a certain point, you diverged off of AA. Episode 13 that you have is incredibly powerful to me. And even though I remain part of AA, there was a lot I could relate to. And you talk in that episode about the first 5 years, a lot of times being incredibly involved and even wanting to be one of those on-the-road speakers. So what happened? What made you change?
In the beginning, there was a lot of things that I struggled with in AA, but I didn't have any other solution. I loved the community. I loved the support. When I started being asked to speak at started off with meetings and then conferences, even though I was talking about a lot of things that just really didn't sit right with me or that I just couldn't relate with, people would come up to me after the meetings and tell me how much I inspired them. So I looked at it as, even if what I was talking about, something that I don't fully believed, it was still helping people, and that's how I justified it. And to me, going and becoming a circuit speaker, that was my ability to help inspire even more people. And like I said, even though I didn't believe in it and a lot of the stuff, and the fact that I was really struggling, I stayed sober, but man, my anxiety just kept getting worse and worse and worse the longer that I stayed sober, and was in Alcoholics Anonymous. But I just wanted to help people. And I figured if I'm helping them, and that's what I tell myself, if I'm helping them, does it matter if I believe it or not? The ends to me was justified the means,
What were some of the things that you had problems with?
A lot of AA felt really like fear-based recovery. and a lot of scare tactics, and then what seemed to be a lot of self-fulfilling prophecies. So, you go in there, you're told if you don't work the steps, you're going to relapse. If you don't go to meetings, you're going to relapse. If you leave AA, you're going to drink. And if you drink, you're going to die. And so there's so much, and it's really the belief system that is talked to a lot about in meetings. And I want to pause for a second, and me and you talked before we started recording. Like, there's often a stark difference between what's taught in the book and what's generally believed by the fellowship.
Very much so.
So you listen to the 9-step promises. They're like, as soon as you get to this point, like, you're not even going to need to worry about alcohol anymore. You go in a meeting and you tell people, like, I haven't even thought about drinking for 30 days. And they're like, oh, danger zone. As soon as you get too uncomfortable, man, alcohol's outside doing push-ups in the bushes, and it's getting stronger. Every day you think you got it. And it's going to, the second you let your guard down, man, you're going to end up drinking. And it was just really that feeling that you always had to be super hyper vigilant about drinking. And I just realized, like, my whole life had become like, it went from obsessing about drinking to obsessing about not drinking. But like the focus on alcohol and the obsession on alcohol was still there, and so it was, and so that was part of it. This has to come first. And I do believe that, like, your recovery needs to be a priority, but that kind of got translated to Alcoholics Anonymous needs to come first. And so there's a lot of direction, like, around going to 90 meetings at 90 days. And so I'm telling guys I'm sponsoring that they need to be doing this, and like that you got to put meetings first. You got to put meetings first. And like these guys were guys that never showed up to their family dinners because they're at the bar. And now they're still not showing up to family dinners because I'm telling them they have to go to a meeting instead. And I'm like, are they becoming a better father this way? Yeah, they're not drunk, but they're still not present, right. And they're still putting something ahead of, like, rebuilding those relationships. And it seemed more important to rebuild those relationships. And yeah, you should put recovery first. Like, if you're going and hanging out with your drinking buddies and every time you do that, you end up drinking, well, yeah, maybe you need to look at that and prioritize staying sober over catching up with your old drinking buddies. But so what ended up happening is, like, that hypervigilance, that always need to be alert, like, that just triggered the fight or flight response in me to an extreme that, like, my anxiety was just off the charts. Like, I was diagnosed with borderline agoraphobia, which is the irrational fear of going outside. Mm-hmm. I was given anti-anxiety medication just so I could function in society, and it kept getting worse and worse. And when I tried to talk to people about it, like, the only solution they could provide me, they're like, it works if you work it. And I'd look back at it, I'm like, do you know anybody? I'm like, name one person in Alcoholics Anonymous that works their program harder than I do. I'm like, I've held a service commitment for 5 years straight. I go to 4 to 5 meetings a week. I have a book study in my house. I'm like, I'm in service at the district level. I'm in service at the group level. I never say no to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm like, I've worked this program, and I'm like, maybe this just isn't for me. Maybe, like, and with that, they're like, that's the alcohol talking. That's your alcoholism talking. Like, that's going to get you out of this program, and you're going to end up going off and drinking. And that's just what I was always told. And I'm like, they're like, you got 5 years sober. I'm like, that's not a gauge for good recovery. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree.
5 years sober, but like I'm getting to the point where, like, my depression's getting to the point where I'm starting to ask myself, is this a life worth living? And I'm like, I'm doing that sober. So, we talk about the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And they're telling me you need to work the steps again. I'm like, I've worked them 3 times, with multiple sponsors, and I'm like, why should I try to do something again that doesn't seem to be working for me? But on the opposite side of that, 5 years pounded into my head that if I leave AA, I'm going to drink. And I truly believe that. So like, it was a really tough spot. I'm like, I don't feel like this is the right thing for me, but I feel like outside the doors, someone's waiting to off me, So I'm like, I'm too scared to leave.
I knew a lot of people like that. And this is where I talk to a lot of people who are not part of AA. And it is almost unanimous that it boils down to the fellowship or specific people in the program that leave a bad taste in their mouth. And I never treat people that way purposely. I might weave in some steps or some principles I know from the big book. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? And I'll talk to them and then say, you just kind of talked through step 4. If you didn't realize that you were talking about, I guess it's sort of step 5, but step 4 of you're telling me some of the things that were your defects. Realize you actually did some step work there. You talked about, I've decided I don't want to be this person anymore. You're talking about steps 6 and 7. That is some good stuff. I got very lucky because I found a crew. John, who is in this program regularly, is my grand sponsor. Steve, who is on this program regularly, is part of a crew that I hooked up with early on. And there were sort of like 2 groups in the groups I went to. There was the old-timer group who were like one of those dolls that you pull the ripcord on the back and they'd let go and they'd say, hey, how you doing? Live and let live. One day at a time. And there would just be one slogan after another. And at a certain point, I got so goddamn sick of the slogans. And I remember being cornered by somebody when I was new and them saying, oh, are you doing your 90 and 90? And I'm like, no, I can't. Oh, you're going to start drinking. And I got really pissed off at this guy because I'm like, I'm going to like 4 or 5 meetings a week. I have a newborn at home. I have a 2-year-old and I have a kindergartner. And I have a wife who's not particularly happy I'm going to these meetings. And yeah, I'm making time for this, but I was also prioritizing if there was something family related, I was going to choose the family over the meetings, and then I'd find another way. And if I had a question, I would talk to either my sponsor or I would talk to John or some of those other people to say, here's what's going on. What do you think? And John has always been good at this. He would always say family first. We had a Joe and Charlie. There were some things going on with the family one night, and with Joe and Charlie, it's you do not miss it. Yeah. So I reached out to him. I got this family issue going on. My son's bus was in an accident. He's fine, but this kind of blew up the day, and he just said, "Family first, don't come." And I have learned from that. And what I'm also hearing here is I am not a fan of one size fits all. I manage people for a living. And so I have kind of learned, reach the person where they are, meet them where they are. Yeah. And I think that's something in AA, in the fellowship, we don't do enough of. Reach the person where they are. I kind of got this early on and I was ready to move. And there are people when I'd ask, they said, you're fine. You have a year sober. That guy over there has got 22 years. Doesn't have your sobriety. It's not about the number of years. It's about what you're doing. And my wish for you would have been, if you were like miserable at 5 years, it would have been, let's come talk. Talk to me about what's going on here.
Yeah.
Instead of the chatty Cathy doll of ripcord of do the steps, 90 and 90, one day at a time. Think. What are those types of things when I hear the reiteration of like the broken record drives me insane. And I just, at a certain point, tuned it out. I don't want to hear it. One of the things that I think in listening to you that really stood out was the whole, I got to live the one day at a time thing, which I think is really important early on. But I'm 9 years sober. I don't think one day at a time anymore.
Yeah.
Because I'm not thinking about drinking.
And I did have, and I'll step back, like my last sponsor I had in California, because I ended up moving back to Phoenix, but the
He
last
sounded
sponsor
amazing,
I had
by
in
the way.
Yeah. The last sponsor I had in California, we did sit and talk about it, but he did not have the capacity to believe that that AA might not be for everybody. And so like anytime I would mention other possible solutions or going out and exploring other solutions, like he was, and I'm not putting him down. He was very well meaning, very loving, very supportive of me. But he, in his heart, thought AA was the only solution. So he was fearful for me. And so, like, the advice of, like, if you're going to leave, you're going to drink, like, it was in good conscience. He was afraid that that's true. He, in his heart, believed that's truly what was going to happen. And when I talk to him now, and I haven't been to a meeting in probably 5 years, like, he's still baffled that I'm still sober. And that I'm doing so much better. Like, it's almost like he's like, doesn't believe it. And so, and I think, like you said, so much of it, the one size fits all was something I really struggled with. And you got to take into context, like, and you talk about the 4 steps. So you're working through your resentments. And when the book was written, like, you got to look at the 100 guys that were helped putting it together. And you look at, like, the resentments that Bill was working through, and it was his boss and his wife and his coworker that has a crush on his wife. Like, he was working through those resentments. And so, like, one of the parts of it is like, find your part in it. And you got to look, and like it's estimated that 75% of people with addiction problems had severe childhood trauma. And so when you're working with someone that has a childhood trauma and you're trying to apply the things that Bill Wilson did to try to work through problems with his boss to childhood trauma, like, that's not effective. And it's more traumatizing to try to tell someone who maybe was sexually abused to go find your part in it. And like, I would see that. And I think that that's healing from those things is the most important thing I found for recovery. And for my recovery was that. And most sponsors are not qualified to walk through people. You need a trauma specialist, someone
Absolutely.
that has specialization in trauma, and as good loving and as well-meaning as they are. Like, I was instructed to find my part in some things that happened as a kid, and I'm like, man, I was a kid. I don't have a part in it. And they're like, well, you're never going to be able to get over this resentment unless you can find your part in it. And I'm like, what's, like, how, and so it actually, like, it re-traumatized it. And so I think a lot of people's just inelasticity and inability to think, you know what, maybe this set of instructions doesn't apply. And when you tell someone that they're different, they're like, that's a bad thing. They're like, well, everybody that thinks they're different, and so it's like, no, some people's cases are different. And maybe these steps are good for a lot of people, but maybe there's parts in the steps that apply to the circumstances of this person and what they've been through. Maybe it isn't good for them. And when I would take on that belief, a lot of times I'd be criticized. Like, you're not taking the guys through, I'm telling a guy, like, we're not even going to cover all of this stuff that you went through as a kid. Like, you need to go to a therapist and talk to them about it. And I'd love to talk to you about it, but anytime you need to come to me, but like, I'm not qualified to walk you through the necessary steps to heal you from some of this massive trauma you've been through as a child.
There are multiple ways. I'm a firm believer that the steps can handle certain things about addiction. For some people, it's more than others. For me, I also had to go to therapy, and I had to go to a therapist who was a 12-step therapist. So she was a therapist, but she was also took from the angle of the steps.
Yeah.
That was important for me. For other people, they have to go to church. There's a religious aspect that I struggle with. There are now podcast Patreon groups, online groups that you can pay for that could be a replacement or in addition to a 12-step group that might help you. I've done quite a bit of reading on the writing of the AA book, and somebody who believed that you had to build on what was written was Bill Wilson. He was horrified that the book itself got put into concrete because that was never his thought process, and always the greatest ideas that we've had. Look, Steve Jobs did not invent the smartphone. He brought it along from where it is. Every idea is built on something else. And when you stop building on those ideas are where you run into problems. It says in the book, the Herbert Spencer quote, contempt before investigation. Well, in some ways, if you say, oh, we can never change this and it has to be just like this for everybody, that's a bit of contempt and contempt. So with an online world, I like that there are other ways that are pushing 12-step programs. We'll see. We'll see if they break or if there's open-mindedness. My hope is open-mindedness to make this better because it's the default setting for most people.
And that's what I tell people. Now, I'm like, find what works for you. And I'm not anti-Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, I found that it wasn't what worked for me. And when I went and started doing other things, like, I got better. You know, I'm no longer, I was able to get off all the medication. I was able to, I got better. But I understand, like, I have a guy that I used to sponsor that still calls me regularly. And when he's struggling with something, I point him back to the big book. Because it doesn't matter that that's not my solution. That's his solution. I'm not religious, but like when my mom is going through something, like I dust off that part of my brain that still remembers a lot of the stuff from Bible study when I was a kid. And I redirect my mom to the Bible, and like she's looking for a therapist right now. And she's like, what do you think's important for qualities of looking for a therapist? I'm like, you need to find a Christian therapist. And she's like, but you're not Christian. I'm like, we're not picking my therapist, we're picking yours. Like, you need to find someone just like, like if I knew someone who was still heavily involved in AA and they wanted to go to therapy, I would suggest exactly what you did. Go find one that believes, that's either in 12-step recovery or who believes in 12-step recovery. Because they need to be giving you advice that's in line with your solution, not their solution.
Tuned to what's going to work for you.
Yeah.
And you're also bringing something up. I think the risk of when people decide to stop going to meetings, and a lot of those people go out and drink, is not because they've stopped going to meetings. They've stopped doing work that will keep them sober. The goal of a 12-step program or anything else to achieve sobriety is not to continue going to meetings. It's the idea that you're not going to drink and you're going to have a fulfilled life. Whatever you do, if you've reached that point of, I don't need to drink and I'm not a miserable bastard, then whatever you're doing is right. And the big book says we don't have a monopoly on this.
Yeah.
And anything I'm critical about AA about is done from love of, I want this to be the best program, because for most people, be it the courts or whatever, it's the default setting of that's the place you should go because it's tried and true.
Yeah.
And if you find an alternative, whatever it is, and you're happy and healthy and you're not thinking about a drink, then you're doing it right as well.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like you really walked away and said, I'm not going to do anything now. You walked away and said, I'm on a journey and I got to figure this out for myself because I want to be happy. I think that's what's different about you.
Yeah, and I agree that a lot of people leave AA. One, I think you have the group of people who already decided they're going to drink. So, like, stopping going to meetings just to the last step, because why go to meetings and drink, And then I think you have a lot of people that leave with the resentment. And so when you leave with the resentment, then that's just boiling over. And eventually, if you haven't learned how to deal with emotions like resentments, and you've always treated it by drinking, then of course you're going to drink. And so you're right. When I left, it was completely different. I moved to Arizona. There was a guy who I knew that lived here. I met him when he spoke at a big anniversary meeting up in Sacramento. He was a circuit speaker. I absolutely loved this guy. Like, he was an old timer, but most of the old timers that I knew were grumpy. And this guy always had a smile on his face. He was like the only old timer that I would hear say, like, if you want what I want, you got to do what I want to do. And he's the only one I looked at and said, yes, I actually want what this guy wants. So when I came to Phoenix, I'm like, and I was still struggling. I'm like, I don't know if, like, should I stay in AA? Am I not doing it right? And I'm like, if anybody could, like, help me, like, work the steps the right way was kind of my thinking. I'm like, it's this guy. So, like, I started going, I didn't have his number, but I remembered he said he lived in Gilbert, and I was like, I'm going to go hit every single meeting in Gilbert, morning, noon, and night, until I find this guy's home group. The funny thing is, the guy was like 80, so I started hitting all the morning meetings. I didn't know his home group was like a 10 p.m. meeting, because I thought he would be asleep by then.
Yeah.
So I finally found him, and I started running around with him and going to all the meetings with him, and he would hear me talk in meetings, and he's like, man, you got a great message. He's like, I want you to start coming to some of the circuit stops with me. And, like, that was still my dream. Like, I still wanted to inspire people. And I was at first really excited. I'm like, it's happening. And then, like, I got this pit in my stomach because I knew I was living a lie. And I'm like, I'm going to be living this lie on even a bigger stage. So I sat down and I talked to him, and I said, hey, look, like, and I told him everything. I'm like, you know, I don't, this just doesn't feel right to me. I think that there's another path for me. And, you know, and he went and he broke out his big book, and I'm like, here it comes again. You know, cunning, baffling, powerful. I was expecting that. And the part that you mentioned is what he went to. And he said, you know, and to quote it, it says, if he thinks he could do the job in some other way or prefers some other spiritual approach, encourage him to follow his own conscience. We do not have the monopoly on God. We merely have an approach that worked for us. And he closes the big book and he looks at me and he says, Tim, I've seen a lot of other people in your situation, and I've seen a lot of them even go on to be great circuit speakers. And I'm like, what happened to them? And he's like, they all either got drunk or they killed themselves sober. He's like, go follow your heart. And he's like, you're going to be just fine. And, like, at that point, like, I hadn't, in retrospect, I don't think I made an actual decision for myself in, like, 5 years sober without running it by my sponsor. So, like, I was afraid still to make my own decisions, and I needed someone I loved and respected, and that was loved and respected in Alcoholics Anonymous, to give me permission to leave, you know? And that's exactly what I did, you know, and I've been blazing my own path ever since, you know, and that was just one of the greatest gifts that anybody's ever given me, because that's what I needed. I don't think I could have left on my own, because I didn't trust my own decision making at that point, and there was that part of me that believed that if I left, like, me wanting to leave was the alcohol being cunning, baffling, and powerful, and if I left, like, I was going to drink, because that's what I've been being told for 5 years straight, and I believed it.
I look at this as, it's not as black and white as you leaving AA. I look at what you're telling me as, you had to go on your own journey, and there is no destination in sobriety. It's like, for me, I struggle with the God thing, and I accept that I'm on a spiritual journey that I will never finish. The journey is the success. You're just on a different journey, and you have to find out some things for yourself. And if you're in a place where you're happy now, and you can find ways to give wisdom to somebody else, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I don't look at that as a bad thing. And I don't look at it as just because you're not going to AA meetings doesn't mean you've turned your back. You're doing something different right now. We're not locked into anything. You may never go to an AA meeting again.
I've been to one. Yeah, I've been to one since I had that day with that sponsor, and it's because I had a friend that was in town, and he's like, "Hey, dude, I need a meeting. Will you go with me?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." A friend needed help, and like I said, that's his solution. So yeah, absolutely. Let's go hit a meeting if that's what you need.
I'm just inspired by, I think that's the thing that's different, that you've got a chance. I mean, we all have a chance. Nothing is for sure. You never know. But I think the thing with you is you're blazing your own path, and whatever it is, you have to find your own journey. That was important for you. And I hear you on the podcast talking about stuff where I hear echoes of the stuff that I do that's part of AA, yet you've made it your own. Tell me a little bit about the podcast. What made you decide, you know what, I'm going to do this horrible hard work that really is doing a podcast? Because after the first 2 episodes, it's work to do this well.
It is. It's and I've been doing it for over 6 months now, and so what happened is, once I left AA, like I really missed helping people, and it seemed like people just randomly started coming out of the woodwork. Like I would meet someone at the grocery store, and it would be someone who says, I went to meetings for a long time and I just really struggled with either the God thing or this thing or this thing, and they didn't know like there was other ways to get sober, so I'd start working with people, and I would, and I'd say, this is what I'm learning, and I just kind of teaching people as I went along, and there was more and more people that just started showing up in my life, and it ended up being a little too much for me to try to help everybody one-on-one. And I had multiple people say, you need to either write this all down or you need to just start talking about it. And I had, after about the 15th or 20th person suggested doing a podcast, I decided to start. Now, I decided to start probably a year before I actually started, because there was about a year of working through all the fear. I did my podcast for 3 months without telling anybody except a few family members or friends. Then I started letting them tell other people. Like, I was still really nervous about doing it and getting myself out there. But it's been an amazing journey. I just recently decided, okay, I'm at 6 months, I decided, okay, I'm all in. Like, I'm really enjoying doing this. I'm helping people. So I'm like, now I'm going to start putting stuff on social media. I'm going to start actually promoting it. I do short videos on social media, which is even more work, But like, I get many people just reaching out to me. I had a young kid reach out to me today, and I messaged him back and forth, and he's like, you don't understand like how grateful I am for what you're doing. And I'm like, I hadn't even met this kid, and I'm having a positive impact on his life. And that means so much to me that I'm able to help people that I don't even know, yet. And so it's really that. And it's really the one thing I miss the most about AA too is the community aspect, And so what I found through podcasting is becoming a part, like the recovery podcast community.
Yes.
Like and like I guested on another show called Through the Glass, and they do a Monday, we all hop on a call and chat for however long, it may run a couple hours, and just being able to do that and being part of the community again, I really enjoyed that. And just the podcast community as a whole. Like,
it's awesome.
Most people I went to a podcast conference in Vegas a couple of months ago. And when I was there, the one thing I noticed in common about everything is it's a lot of people who feel their voices are not heard that have now gotten a platform to be able to speak out. and it's really good. It's a lot of people talking about things that we have been as a society taught, like, you don't talk about that, you stuff it down. So a lot of things that have been kind of that shame thing, it's like people are shining lights on it, whether it's mental health, whether it's recovery, whether it's being an alcoholic or being an addict or any of that. Like, you shine a light on shame, something you've hidden for so long, like your shame it scurries just like cockroaches when you flip the light on, and so it's a beautiful community, and I've loved doing it, so I don't have no plans on stopping.
No,
it's a lot of work.
Grind
I
through
work
it.
full time. Yeah, I work full time. I do this in the evenings, and it's
me too.
And it's totally worth it. Totally worth it for me. I've grown a ton, but the fact that now that I have people reaching out to me and saying that I'm having positive impacts on their life, like, that's just a humongous bonus.
That, for me, when I'm grumpy and I look at my numbers and say I'm not where I would want to be, and I'm comparing against others, that's when I get an email from somebody or an Instagram message where they say, hey, I'm a janitor at night, and you are part of what helps me recover as I'm cleaning, that I'm dialed in listening to you. I go, I've been an ass. I need to reframe, because it's about helping people.
Yes.
So if you got angry at this conversation, that's okay, because we should have conversations that challenge you, not reinforce everything you believe. But either way, if you want to email me, matt@soberfriendspod.com. You liked what we talked about, you thought we were fair to AA, you thought we were bashing AA, I'll take it. I'm a big boy. I'm about having conversation here. What I'd like you to do is give Tim a shot. His podcast is the Sober and Happy Podcast. You can find it anywhere. What's your Instagram handle?
It's I am sober and happy.
Excellent. Follow him there too.
Yep, Instagram, Facebook, on both. Same content in both of them, so whichever your preferred platform is.
Awesome. All right, Tim, thanks for doing the show with me tonight. It's been great to hear your story.
Thank you so much, Matt, for this conversation. And like you said, these are the type of conversations we should have. And
Absolutely.
I will say one thing I was surprised with is when I started posting content, I expected a whole bunch of backlash.
Me too.
And everybody that's disagreed with me in the comment section, it's always turned into a positive conversation. So it's just the beauty of when people are willing to have conversations about stuff and agree to disagree. That's something that's been lost in today.
I agree.
So yeah. So thank you for having this conversation. Thank you for inviting me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Wow, it's been my pleasure. We'll see you all next week. Bye, everybody. You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod.